Okay, so looking at God as mother, of course, because God is beyond gender, and since God has become all of this, He's become this gender and that gender and that gender and that gender and that gender, and it's up to you to number them. I don't care. And but God as the Divine Mother incarnated as Sri Sharda Devi, and we're on page 480 of this book, Sri Sharda Devi and Her Divine Play. And we've been talking quite a bit about taking initiation, which is when you meet the person you want to be your teacher, and you state your commitment to them as your teacher or your guru, and they take you on as your student. And in the world of ideals, they make a commitment to you that they will be there to bring you across into your realization, into your knowledge of self, and that they won't take their own merging until that happens. So there's a wonderful commitment and dedication in that relationship to each other. And at the time of initiation, the teacher will normally give you a mantra, a name of God, and so with some bead syllables, what they call bead mantras, which are words that actually don't have a meaning, or a meaning that's not known anymore, but that those mantras have generally, if you've been given one by your guru, it's generally successfully led somebody to realization before. And so you get that added assurance that this is meaningful, and that it may motivate you in singing the name of God, because we're going to start off right away today with quite a lovely statement. And it's the first time that I had heard it. I only read one paragraph when I sat down today, but let me share it with you. In April of 1919 at Kolpara, a devotee received initiation from the mother. Before returning home, he asked, "Mother, what is the secret of spiritual life?" I love questions like that. What is the secret of spiritual life? In reply, Holy Mother pointed to a small clock and said, "As that timepiece is ticking, so you should go on repeating God's name. That is the way you will find fulfillment. You will not have to do anything else." There it is, class over. That's all we can teach you. The secret of spiritual life is simply the repetition of God's name. Now, that sounds very simple, and it is very simple. But where is the power in that? How is that possible? You see, Ramakrishna says that there is no difference between the name of God and God, that you cannot have the name without the form. If I say milk to you, immediately everybody thought of milk, right? Your mind went there immediately. If I say cheese, if I say anything, if I say your mom, immediately these things are brought to mind. And so it is with the name of God. You say the name of God or the name of your chosen ideal, whether it's Jesus or Buddha or Rama, whatever chosen ideal or incarnation, manifestation of the divine that you are using, or that you are in relationship with, that invokes the presence. And you see, the presence is an infinity. And so each time that you say God's name, the mind is going to pull up a form that is always going to grow in its accuracy, right? It's never going to reach perfect accuracy. You're never actually, well, yeah, I think that's safe to say. I mean, you may have a vision of your Ishta, you may have a vision of God in form, and who knows what form is going to manifest. Why am I forming an opinion about something I don't know? But she's saying that you do it all the time as that clock is ticking, which 24/7. Your mind should always have a portion of itself on God. Ramakrishna, I think, says a 16th, something like that, so that your mind should always somewhere be aware of the divine. And so it is very possible to continuously, repeat the name. If you were to, connect it to your heartbeat somehow, so that anytime you feel your heartbeat, it would remind you to say the name. That could be helpful, or the breath is often pointed to as well. For me, I remember when I was first starting my practices in Vedanta, I was a contractor and I would walk, since I was in San Francisco, you can walk everywhere. I would walk from one client to the next. And as I walked, every time my right foot hit the ground, I would start my mantra. And I was quite surprised to find that after only 2 weeks, the mantra would start on itself, even if I had forgotten, even if I wasn't doing the practice and I wasn't walking, if I was walking to the grocery store instead of to a client, that the name would start. And I'm even more amazed that here now, some 30 years later from that, if I go out for a hike, I cannot go more than 5 or 6 steps before that name will involuntarily start. Again, the mantra will start up automatically. And so these are great practices. And by constantly invoking the presence within you, you become aware of the presence. And ultimately, you come to the knowledge that the presence is real, even if you started it in imagination. And that can manifest in many different ways. One with an internal vision of the presence or the face of your beloved, or a full-on something that I think I heard somewhere, or somebody told a story once where they had been trying to envision Ramakrishna in their mind for a long time, but they weren't very visual and they weren't very good at it, but they kept trying. And the story is told that one day the face appeared in their mind, but it was so clear and so high resolution and so perfect that it was not, they could not be convinced that it was a thought or that it was an imagining of a picture, because they had never had an experience like that before. And so just one of those things along the way. So this is the secret of spiritual life, is to be in the constant remembrance of the presence of your beloved, the presence of love, which is a very nice way of putting it in a modern, gentle speak. To be aware, to sing the name of love, that love manifests within you, and that your mind is constantly couched in the idea of a pure and perfect love, which is represented by your chosen ideal, by a Jesus or by a Buddha or by a Ramakrishna. So Mother says in reply, pointing to a small clock, as that timepiece is ticking, so you go on repeating God's name. That is the way you will find fulfillment. Now, that's a beautiful word for enlightenment right there. That's your fulfillment, that you will know your nature, you will know what you are. And by knowing what you are, you'll know what you should do, if that's your next question, or what that means. In a rudimentary way for us, the way that we can think about that in a very useful way is to understand that the nature of the divine, which can't really be described. We're not really able to say anything about God, because God is always that plus so much more. He can't be limited by an adjective of any kind. So we shouldn't really make that practice. That's why most of the time when somebody talks about God, they'll say, oh, he's this, that, and the other, and more. Right? So you always have to go for that beyond. But the last 3 words, the way I think about it, the last 3 things that you'll scream out to your friends as you're falling into that union with your beloved will be love, wisdom, being, oneness. And then there's nothing else said, but your last 3 descriptions of ecstasy will be love, wisdom, being. And to know that that is your nature, and not just your nature, but the nature of this entire universe. That gives you a key to how to interpret the events that happen in your life to you. You know that those events somehow are sourced in love, in wisdom, and in being. And so that is an excellent decoder ring that you can use to understand the events in your life and to know what you need to wrestle with. Because if you're convinced that God has done something to you because he didn't like you or because he's mad at you or something, think again. Go back and apply your decoder ring of love, wisdom, and being, and try and find the perspective within which you can understand that the reason for these things happening came out of that love. Find it somewhere. And if you can't, at least have that faith in that knowledge. And then also another way of using it is to know that these are the only three motives that are native to you. These are the only three reasons that you do anything. You know, either to express the love that is within you, or to express the wisdom that is within you, or to come closer to being. Being, I was always, which is the other word is existence, but being says a little bit more than just existence, because being is something that seems like it's not anything you would have to do, and it is true because you're doing it anyway, but it's an awareness of being. It's the same as the awareness of the presence, because interestingly enough, the presence of God is your own presence, because God is existence and you exist. So it is because of the presence of the beloved that you are. And so by constantly chanting the names of God, we come to that understanding as well. And that union begins its cycle at that point. Holy Mother emphasized japa, which is the repeating of God's name, and meditation to her disciples, right? Well, what's the difference between japam and meditation? Well, we all know japam is the repeating of God's name, invoking that presence. And meditation comes at a later state when you aren't needing to repeat the name anymore. You have the thought of God steady and unbroken in your mind. So to actually meditate, very few people have ever meditated. We all make our best efforts and we call it meditation, and the teachers are kind enough to let us have that delusion that we're meditating. But really, meditation, if you have that unbroken thought of God in your mind, they say that ecstasy or your realization is not more than a few seconds away. If you can manage to hold that thought for a few seconds, even that the ecstatic, the power of that presence, for the mind to hold that for a few seconds is enough to finish the work completely. So Holy Mother emphasizes japam and meditation to her disciples, but she also reminded them that devotion and self-surrender are the keys to attaining God's grace, right? So devotion, which is turning your love toward God, and using that as an impetus for growing in that relationship. So that devotion and self-surrender, right? And what is this self-surrender? You see, if Satchitananda are the only three motives or change of powers of what you are, of what moves you in this world, then everything else that comes in your mind as a motive, hungers, passions, dislikes or aversions, all these other things that can motivate us into an action, those need to be surrendered. Why? Because our actual nature is Satchitananda, love, wisdom, and being. So all these other things that come in as secondary motives are impure or incomplete or based on a selfish need, body-mind need, right? And so our act of surrender is to surrender anything that is motivated by our delusion that we are a body or that we are a mind. And we lay that at the feet of our highest ideal, which is a pure love and a pure wisdom and a pure being. And by surrendering anything else, we slowly scooch ourselves into this beautiful space of being true to ourselves, being true to what we are. So she also reminded them devotion and self-surrender are the keys to attaining God's grace. She said, we have practiced so much japam. We have observed so many spiritual disciplines, but nothing whatsoever is of any avail. How can anyone get liberation unless Mahamaya clears the path? And Mahamaya is her own self. Mahamaya is God as mother. God as mother is normally used when God is expressed. When Satchitananda is purely enacted or purely empowered, it is the manifestation of God. It is this visible world. And so this manifested world is the Divine Mother. And it is her realm, and it is her permission that is given to us to come to that realization, to be free from this delusion, right? And she's saying here, she's pointing out that this final realization is always an act of grace. It can never be the result of a doing. It cannot happen. Uh, that's the way it is. The way I like to think about that is if I think of the camel, there's you see, my mind is kind of broken in this way. But anyway, you see this camel, and that the last straw that you can put on a camel's back, someone loads up a camel and they're like, oh, he can't take any more. And the owner mistakenly says, no, he can take just one more piece of straw. And he puts one more piece of straw on the camel and it breaks the camel's back, right? Now imagine the other way, right? Imagine the camel's taking the straw off of its own back, one piece at a time. And when that last piece is gone, the ego is gone. The sense of an individual self is broken. And so you would not be able to remove the last piece of straw from your back because your sense of self, as soon as you lifted the straw, would disappear and there would be no one to finish removing the straw. And so that is why that last stepping into realization is always an act of grace. Even St. John of the Cross, even in Christianity, they talk about the fact that you can only come to the chasm between the material world and the spirit, between the world of delusion, perhaps, and reality, by an act of grace when something removes that last delusion from you and you find your freedom. So how can anyone get liberation unless Mahamaya clears the path? Oh man, take refuge in God. Take refuge in him. Then alone will Mahamaya be gracious and pave the way for liberation. Right? So take refuge in divine love. Right? Run to the feet of God. One of the beautiful stories Ramakrishna tells us, there was a time where he was standing in a rice paddy and they were coming along and catching all the fish that were in the rice paddies. And one fish swam over and began circling Ramakrishna's ankles. It wouldn't leave him. And Ramakrishna saw that as the fish taking refuge in him. And he made arrangements for them to save that fish and to take it to safety. The same thing with a kitten. One time at Belurmat, a kitten ran and took refuge at Ramakrishna's feet. And he had one of the devotees take that kitten and serve it and take care of it for its life. And so this idea of refuge is very, very, very important. And God says, take refuge in me. If that's how you get your grace. Come to me when you're with your troubles. Come to me with your anxieties. Right? And I've told you that story. It's like, this is a very important thing because most of us growing up in the world, we have 1,000 different cures for our anxieties and depressions, right? Our loneliness and whatnot. We go to the bar, we call up a friend, we go out dancing, we go out camping, go out hiking, we travel, and nothing is inherently wrong in any of those things. But if you use them to find your refuge, to take your refuge, they don't have any power to give you refuge. All of these things that we do in the world can only give us a distraction, which means when they're over, they hand back the original package to you. When you get done with that cruise, you're back in the cubicle. When you get done with that ski trip, you're back at the grill. It's like nothing in this world can actually be that refuge for you. God alone can be that refuge. And this, I tell that story and I'll tell it again because that's all I can do. Is to remind you that I've been in the monastery for several years, and I was there alone and had been there alone for several months, and I didn't think I could do it anymore. I was the only monk in the building, and Swami was always in his office next door or somewhere else, and I'd been rattling alone in that old monastery for a few days, and I was depressed, and I was standing at the top of the stairs outside of the shrine door, and I was, looking. They had a picture of Jesus and Mary there on the wall, and that's the picture that Ramakrishna had, that spiritual experience where the light came out and entered into his heart. And so I don't know the thousands of times that I prayed as I passed that picture that, do me, as I walked by, always hoping. And so I was standing there in front of that picture at the top of the stairs, being depressed and feeling sorry for myself because here I was alone in the monastery. How was I going to do this? I can't do this. And Swami came in the door, right? He came up the stairs, and on his way up, he saw me. Oh, what is this? And I told him, oh, Maharaj, I'm so sad. I'm so depressed. I have no friends. I have no one to talk to. This is terrible. I can't possibly do this. And I was hoping to get a nice big hug and a pat on the back and some words about how good I was doing as he came up the stairs. But if you remember the story, he just walked right by me, didn't touch me at all, walked right into his bedroom and shut the door. And just before the door closed, he just looks out at me and he says, so go to the shrine. And he said it as in a way that was like, well, why don't you do the one most obvious thing in the world? Why are you telling me about it standing out in the hall? Go to the shrine. And I was furious at first. That was the first thing. I was like, he doesn't care about me at all. I could leave. I could fall down these stairs right now and he wouldn't even come out to check on me. And so I went into the shrine and I sat there and I started complaining, to God about my situation. And I learned so much that day. That's when I heard, or, in my own way, heard Mother whisper in my ear, you see, you have so many refuges in your life. You have never come to me directly as a real world solution to any problem that you've had. And, those times that you might have managed, you didn't believe it. You weren't really here for an answer. You were here for the same distraction that you go to all of your other refuges for. And I realized that day, I will be bold. And I said, I will say out loud that I realized that day that I had never really believed in God. I never had actually stepped off of an edge with the absolute trust that God would catch me, or that God could do anything for me, or could actually, in a real world, real situation, cure a situation for me. And I understood my lack of faith, and I understood the fear that I had of trying that. And, I really believe that because of that work that was initiated that day, that we've been allowed to come and experience these times together, where I really believe now more than at any other time in my life. I know, not all the time, I still have my terrors, my doubts for sure. But now I have a good arsenal of proof, of evidence that Mother takes care, that this refuge is a true refuge, that this refuge is real. And so that's why Mother is saying here, oh man, take refuge in God. And then she says it again, take refuge in him. She means it. She's yelling it at us. Then alone, right? Then alone will Mahamaya be gracious and pave the way to liberation, right? So anytime, and I can't say this emphatically or with enough emotion to you, anytime that you are in a state of doubt, in a state of fear, a state of anxiety, a state of pain, anything, go to the shrine. Go there, not knowing or expecting anything. Go in surrender and sit in front of Mother and open your heart and open your mind and let happen what happens. Mother will receive you, and you will find that knowing that you are looking for. That is the only way for actual real change to happen in us, and not just for being distracted from it. Once Surendranath Sarkar asked Holy Mother whether Prarabdha karma, right? Prarabdha karma is all the karma that you've done in the past. That is, it's the arrow after it leaves the bow, right? You fire the arrow, and suddenly you don't want to hit the bird with an arrow. Well, now it's too late. You've already set that karma in action, and it must fulfill itself. That's Prarabdha karma. Karma that you've set into action that now must be fulfilled. So once Surendranath asks Holy Mother whether Prarabdha karma could be counteracted by repeating the name of God, right? He says, is there any way that we can undo something we've already done? Can it be counteracted by this japam? The Mother replied, one must experience the result of Prarabdha karma. Okay, so in a way, no. But she's going to clarify, I think. She says, no one can escape it. But japa, or the repetition of God's holy name, minimizes its intensity. It is like the case of a man who was destined to lose his leg, but instead suffers only a thorn in his foot, right? So God will lessen the effect of that parabdha karma, but he won't remove the effect of that parabdha karma. It's important that we learn. It's important that we get the message of our karmas, because karma is really a teacher. Anytime karma is there to remind you when you step out of your nature, when you're not acting out of love, out of wisdom, out of your presence, out of your being, then karma kicks in, that discomfort. Oh, ouch, ow, ooh. Life gets difficult. Why is life difficult? Well, something is out of whack. Something within us is not being true to our nature, right? And so it's always a reminder for that. But she will, the other example I know she gives elsewhere, she said, if you were destined to be run through with a sword, that you might get a pinprick instead. So it's a nice deal. And it can be done so simply, just by repeating the name of God. You don't even have to do it with any faith. You don't have to do it with any sincerity. And before somebody throws something at me for saying that, just remember, Mother says, whether you jump into the river or get thrown in the river, you get wet nonetheless, right? So you may start out just rotely saying the name of God, but the fact that you had even the smidgen of faith to start doing it meaninglessly is enough. That's why Jesus says, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, right? And then he goes on and explains these crazy, wild things you're able to do with just a faith of that size. And so here, this is the same situation. If you have just enough faith to try, just enough faith to start to practice, that's enough. Mother will come in. That's where I also like to tell my story. When I started this whole thing, God, even to have my mind go back to those days is spooky in a way. But when I first began these things, I didn't have any faith in them, actually. I was curious about them. I was intrigued by them, but I wasn't sure I really believed in them. But like I said, I started my practice with 2 minutes twice a day. That's all I did, 2 minutes twice a day. I sat in front of my shrine. I didn't have a mantra at that time, so I made one up. I made up a name of God that I thought was appropriate, and sat there and just would look. And I didn't even have anything on my shrine that was a particular person. I just had things that I loved on there, just stuff that I had that reminded me of positive things, beautiful things on that shrine. And so from 2 minutes a day, suddenly I was in the monastery, right? And now 30 years later, I'm getting to share with you some of the beautiful things in life that have come out of 2 minutes twice a day. And so don't doubt these words. Don't make the mistake of thinking that there's no power in what the Divine Mother is telling you. She means it. This is the secret of spiritual life, and this is where you will find your fulfillment. All right, the next section, Holy Mother answers questions. As we make progress in spiritual life, we encounter various problems and become confused. At that time, we need a guru to answer our questions. We are indebted to the Mother's disciples who asked questions on our behalf and left those answers for us. Answers that are simple, direct, practical, convincing, and inspiring. Swami Shantanananda asked these vital questions to Holy Mother. Swami Shantanananda: what should be our mode of life? Holy Mother: spend your life in the same way as you are doing now. Pray to the Master earnestly. Think of him always. Okay, so there's your two things. It's the same instruction as Japam, really. Right? What do you have to do in life? What should your mode of living be? Do I have to go sit on a mountain? Do I have to go run naked in the hills? Do I have to fast until I'm bony? What do I have to do? What is my mode of life? And Mother says, go on with the way that you are. Go on with your life. That's not really the issue. It's not what you're doing. It's how you're doing it. Are you doing it with consciousness, with awareness? Awareness of what? Awareness of the presence of God, awareness of your nature as an image of the beloved, right? So Mother says, spend your life in the same way as you are doing now. Pray to the Master earnestly and think of him always. Shantanananda. Mother, I'm overtaken by fear when I see how even highly spiritual persons meet with a fall. And that's, I don't even like to think in that direction, because I always feel the danger of that, especially if you put yourself forward, of being humiliated, being some old samskara comes up and bites you. That's one time I got in trouble for going out to a cafe and having a cup of coffee when I was a brahmachari, when Swami was in India, and one of the nuns saw me and reported it. I'm so happy I don't know who she was. Somehow I didn't see her, even though she saw me. And so she told Swami, and he called me into his office when he got back from India. He says, "Oh, it seems that someone saw you in a cafe when you were, while I was in India." I was like, "Yes, Maharaj, I was out for a walk." I didn't see any problem with it. I said, "Yes, I was out for a walk, and I just thought it would be nice to have a cup of coffee." And so I went into the cafe and got one. And he said, "See, this is not our ideal." Right? Which is, as a monk, we're always trying to demonstrate the ideal. He says that it is a small thing. He says, for you to have a cup of coffee, it's not a problem, not a big problem in that way. But he says you should understand you have many samskaras that could be woken up by going back and doing things you used to do. And he says you don't know what will be awakened. Will someone come into the cafe that you know? Will someone sit and say something to you that leads to something else? He says, so we should always be very, very, very careful. He says a monk should only take food or eat, in a monastery or with the devotee's house or something like that. He says we only go out to do things when there's no other alternative. He said, if you're traveling or something, it's okay. He says, but always keep your mind on the ideal. Right. And so here Swami's saying the same thing. I'm overtaken by fear when I see that even highly spiritual people meet with a fall. Right. And we certainly, we're not going to think about those examples, but there's plenty of them out there. We've seen it a number of times. Mother, if you are constantly in touch with objects of enjoyment, if you're constantly going into cafes, constantly going out dancing, constantly doing these things, right, you are likely to succumb to their influence. My son, don't look at a woman, even if it only be a figure made of wood. Avoid the company of women. The master said, monk, beware. A monk should always be alert. A monk's path is very slippery. One should tiptoe on the slippery path. Is it a small thing to become a monk? A monk must not even glance at a woman. While walking, he should keep his eyes fixed on his toes. The ochre cloth of a monk protects him, as does the collar on a dog. No one hurts such a dog, for they know that it has master.
Swami, now this directive is not here in America, right? The Swamis mingle with the female devotees.
He is. It's not, has nothing to do with nationality. The teaching remains, right? The teaching remains, but it's just like what Prabhupada told me. There are times when it's understandable we have to do these things in the line of duty or as a form in service. If you walk by someone who's wounded on the street, you're not going to sit there and, oh, that's a woman, I'm not going to help her. So there are times. This is an ideal that Mother is describing. This is the highest bar that she can set. So, I think in those times, society in India was better arranged to make this possible, or to make this a doable practice for a monk. We even now, like at Bellarmont, there are areas of the Bellarmont where there are only monks. The public is not allowed there at all, and it would be very easy just to stay there all the time. And so it can be done. And if for someone who's more susceptible to these things, or who has gotten specific instructions from their guru, or like Shantanananda here, getting it directly from Mother, it's important that we go for that ideal. And even though, and she is talking to a monk, right? So this is not a general instruction for everybody out there. Gosh, I can't see with them on or what's
Yeah,
that?
all the American centers, the they interact with the female devotees like, no, am I confused? Like you're a monk, right? And
Yes, no, yes.
I
Thanks
mean,
for
you're
asking.
interacting with us.
Yes.
I don't feel like you treat me, maybe you're more intimate with the men devotees. No, but
Yeah,
do
we won't talk about my case for a few reasons.
okay, but
But
no,
we could talk about, but like in San Francisco when Swami Prabhupada was there, I was not allowed to talk to the nuns, and there were nuns. There were several times there were some nuns in the convent there, who when they saw me on the street would look away or look down at their feet, would not greet me, and they were not allowed to greet me. That was the rule. And even if I was working on a project where I would have to work with one of the nuns, I was not allowed to meet with that nun. We would have to set an appointment with Swami, and the two of us would meet in Swami's room and engage in that conversation about what was necessary for the project. And so every effort was made to maintain that separation, not just the men from the women, but the women from the men also. They were not supposed to call, we weren't supposed to call each other by our first names, or, it was always by Mr. or Ms. and last name. That was the ideal. And
we
so,
have nuns, I guess, to meet the needs of the female devotees.
yeah, yeah, because that's the confusion that is quite constant with our situation. Because the order here, the Ramakrishna order, is only half of the Ramakrishna movement. The Ramakrishna order is the men's order. It's the monks' order. But there's the Sharada Devi, the order of nuns as well. But they haven't put a center in the West yet. And so a lot of times the men's order gets accused of, a patriarchal idea, which yes, it has one, absolutely, because it's a men's order, right? And so that's built into it. It wasn't. It's designed that way. And just because the men's order is the only order that has come to the United States so far, uh, they decided early on in the 20s that they would allow women to join as nuns, as kind of, I'm going to say, unofficial members, even though that very unpopular. It's really the reality that they're unofficial members of the order, because it's a men's order. And I was told by the president way back when, with the nuns in the room with us, because we were asking about these things and why they were the way they are, and why aren't the nuns on the list of members of the order. And he said that if that it's not, it wasn't meant to be a permanent situation. It was meant to be a temporary situation until the nuns, until the Sardamat had a center here that women could join, and it was supposed to be like that. Well, they haven't gotten here yet, and so we have 100 years of a temporary situation.
Oh dear. And Vivekananda, he was very friendly with ladies.
Yes, he was. He was also, and I have brought that up. I have made that argument to senior swamis, and they retort with, "And he was Vivekananda."
All right. Okay.
If I could bring up the Vedanta Center, the Vivekananda Center in Chicago,
Uh-huh.
has a publication that you can get online, and there's a really good article about the whole history of the nuns in the United States. And I would go look that up, because it really gives you a good history and the problems and all that. So it was very illuminating.
Excellent. And that's where could they find that?
On the website of the Chicago Vivekananda Center.
Okay.
Yeah, the Vedanta Center in Chicago. And they have a publication online. I don't have it right in front of me right now, but you can, and there's a really good article about the whole nun, because I had a lot of questions about the nuns too. So.
Oh, very good. Very good.
I can maybe send a little, well, I did send you a little note on that, so I can send it to you again.
Yeah, if you know how to put it in the chat, if you know where it is, you could put a link in the chat for everybody.
Okay,
Otherwise,
okay, I'll
okay,
work on it.
okay, super. All right. So mother is telling Shantanananda, if you're constantly in touch with objects of enjoyment, you're likely to succumb to their influence, right? Ooh. That's why alcoholics don't go into a bar. You know, don't get the idea, oh, I can just have a drink, just one. Because it puts the ideas in the mind and it sets up a state of mind. And it's just better to practice discipline than to flirt with uh, dangerous things, you know. And we like to smile at these things because I don't think often we take these things very seriously because our lives in this country are so um, well, outside of Vedanta centers, they're very enjoyment oriented. And so that's kind of how we were all raised. We've all been raised exposed to everything constantly, you know, going to movies and all crazy stuff that happens in a movie, which I'm not going to go puritanical because I don't think that's the point at all. But guard yourself. Do not unnecessarily place yourself into situations that you know your enjoyment center is being titillated with whatever that enjoyment might be. You know, so just be careful is what she's saying. And she's talking to a monk, so she's saying it a little bit more strongly. She's saying, don't just be careful, don't you do it, because you're a monk and it's very slippery. That's a very slippery slope. The master said, monk, beware. A monk should always be alert. And that's the point. That's the instruction right there. The other stuff are specifics to that particular person or to that person as a monk. But this one here is for everybody, you know, not just a monk, but we should always be alert. A monk's path is very slippery, right? Because he's trying to hold a very high note. And so it takes some very careful discernment. One should tiptoe on a slippery path. Is it a small thing to become a monk? A monk must not even glance at a woman. While walking, he should keep his eyes fixed on his toes. The ochre cloth of the monk protects him, as does the collar on a dog. No one hurts such a dog, for they know that it has a master. Shantanananda. Mother, is it good to practice asanas and pranayamas, yogic postures and breathing exercises? Mother, these practices lead to supernatural powers, which deflect a person from the spiritual path. Shantanananda. Okay, he's asking another question. So let's talk about that for a second. So these practices, these yogic postures and breathing exercises, they lead to supernatural powers, which deflect a person from the spiritual path, right? If you do end up with a spiritual power, you know, and again, I don't want to delve too deeply into these things because, you know, those are things, they're there. Just know that they're there. And if you do those sets of practices, they will give you those powers or you encounter those abilities. And if you encounter those abilities, you're going to want to use them. And if you fall to that, if you actually begin to use them, they feed egoism. And it's very difficult to get out of that situation. There's some stories in the gospel with Sri Ramakrishna where somebody does something in front of him that's a spiritual power. In one instance, they're walking and it gets dark, and this guy has this very odd power of shining a light out of his back, out of his chakra in the middle of his back. And so he tells them, oh, don't worry. And he turns around, starts walking backwards and illumines the whole path. And what does Ramakrishna do? He takes the power away from the guy on the spot, you know, because he could see that was hurting that man's progress, that he was getting caught by this thing. So yes, so yogic postures, breathing exercises, if you do it with the teacher, and be very careful and understand that it's a very powerful practice, and that you have to live a very, very, very pure life in order to not be in trouble from those kinds of practices. You can't, if there's any impurity, any lust within you, you know, any love of enjoyment within you, and you begin those practices, the mind can become unstable. And so that's why they warn people away from it, because there are practices that will bring you to your realization that don't put you in that danger. And so she's saying, choose the safer path. don't take that one necessarily. Shantanananda, is it good to be going about from one place of pilgrimage to another? Is it all right just to wander from center to center or from pilgrim place to pilgrim place? Mother, if the mind feels at rest in a particular place, there is no need for pilgrimage. Ramakrishna says it, he went on all those pilgrimages, and his summary at the end was like, well, I saw the same trees there that I see here. Right? So when we have a restless mind, and we've tried to control it, we've done our best, and we just need to go, Ramakrishna is going to say, oh, yes, go, by all means. Absolutely, go, see the place, and then come back and get back to the practice of not going. Right? When I was in the monastery, I'd been in the monastery for 8 years, and in San Francisco, the monks didn't get any vacation, no traveling, no vacation. Swami's idea was, what does a monk need a vacation from? Which was an infuriating question. But nonetheless, we did no traveling at all. And so I lived in that building for 8 years, 24/7, without ever getting a break, without ever traveling and going to another center or something. And one day I went to Swami and I said, Maharaj, I would like to take a trip. I would like to get a vacation. And he says, oh, is it really necessary? And I said, well, Maharaj, I've been trying, and this has been nagging me now for several months. And I feel like I'm just going to go crazy, here like this. And he said, oh, okay, that is the time then. He said, okay, you can go. Where do you want to go? And I said, oh, I was thinking I would go to Trabuco for 2 weeks. And he went, oh, 2 weeks. No, you can go to Trabuco for 5 days. And I said, Maharaj, 5 days? I won't even get there before I have to turn around and come back. That won't be a break at all. He said, okay, you can do a week. And I said, Maharaj, 1 week. It's been 8 years, Maharaj. Okay, you can do 10 days. And I was like, cool. I said, shall I take the car? No, you cannot take the car. You can fly there and they will pick you up. And then he sent me out the door. didn't even give me $1 to spend. So I got to go stay in the monastery for a week, for 10 days in Trabuco, and it was delightful. But I was hoping he would have slipped me, a little lunch money or something, and nope. So that's how it is. Yes, some things are permissible. They're permissible, but do your best. Be alert. Try to sing that high note and hold it. And if we're given that good effort and you can't, and you need a break, you need an exception, then with prayer and the awareness of the love of God, take your break, give yourself your inch, and take your rest and be happy in it. And then come back and get back to work again. Grace is the rule, love is the king. Worry not and go forward. That's the thing. Excuse me. So if the mind feels at rest in a particular place, there's no need for pilgrimage. Shantanananda, I find it impossible to meditate. Please awaken my Kundalini. Mother, it will awaken in the course of time. Do japam and meditation. It does not rise of itself. Continuous meditation will make the mind so steady that you will not feel inclined to give it up. When the mind is not in a mood to meditate, do not force it to do so. In such conditions, get up from the seat of meditation after making prostrations. Real meditation is of a spontaneous nature. Right? So she's saying here, don't make this a cause and effect thing also. Don't think that, that meditation has to be done in order to achieve something. Right? That's part of the problem. We're not in a mercantile situation here. We know well from the scriptures that enlightenment is the only effect that has no cause, right? So it is always because of grace that we have that we have our enlightenment. Always from grace. And so she's saying, don't force yourself. Don't force yourself. My teacher told me, when I was doing my strenuous 2 minutes twice a day. Even then, she told me, she says, there's some days when you will not be able to do that. And she says, but on those days, you must still go to the shrine and you must bow down and salute mother and tell her, mother, I can't do it today. And then get up and go about your business. But always hold the space in your mind that even though I'm not doing it, this is the placeholder and this is the time when I do it. Right. So, yes, the other morning, I think I shared this last week. I had a morning where I came in here to do my practice. And I couldn't, I just wasn't in the space for it. So I was, and I knew this. And so that morning, and instead of sitting there and forcing myself to do my meditation, I went in and I made mother and I a cup of coffee. And I came into my room and I sat here in my meditation chair and I had a cup of coffee with mother on the shrine, and we just sat and had a chill hour together. Not a whole hour, I don't think it was, but we had a chill time together where we just kind of talked. I hummed a few things, just sat there enjoying, right? But not really doing my practice, but being in the presence in a fun sort of way. So this is the thing. You have to befriend the mind. You have to remember your mind is a toddler, and you're trying to train it to grow up to become a self-controlled adult. And you don't do that by beating it, by forcing it, by poking at it, by punishing it. You did that by befriending it and inspiring it by your own love for your own self. That's why I always talk about that verse in Corinthians. Your inner dialogue should always be hopeful, should always be encouraging. Your inner dialogue should always believe in you, should always trust in you, should always hope in you. And you should have a faith that you will not fail, because love never fails. And love is your nature. So within ourselves, when we come to these rules and such, understand that these rules are all couched in grace and couched in love, and that they're not absolutes, and they shouldn't be done as a form of attainment or a form of grabbing or achieving. They should come spontaneously out of your love for love, which is natural to us. And if it doesn't seem natural, then just sit silently, and in time you'll become aware of how natural it is for you to love and for you to be wise, how that is, in fact, part and parcel of what you are. Real meditation is of a spontaneous nature. Shantanananda, mother, why is it that the mind does not become steady? When I try to think of God, I find that the mind is drawn toward other objects. Right? Boy, that's kind of a fun. I don't know if I should call it fun, but I found it very interesting. In my early days, of course, the mind obviously still gets pulled away by crazy things. But I always, in the early days, was always very curious about when did that happen? I would be in the shrine doing my practice and suddenly become aware that I was thinking something that I wouldn't normally think in a shrine. And I would sit there and be like, how did that happen? I was sitting here doing japam. I was sitting in a shrine where everything is holy. When did my mind go there? And if you ever want to know the nature of Mahamaya, the nature of this delusion, of this illusion that we are in this world, try and find the point when your mind leaves God. You won't find it. You won't find it, because it's a moment of unawareness, a moment of unconsciousness when it happens. So you don't see it when it happens. And that's the magic. That's the trick of the trickster. So he's asking, why is this? And why is it drawn toward other objects? And mother says, it is wrong if the mind is drawn towards worldly objects. By worldly object is meant money, family, and so on. But it is natural for it to think of the work in which one is engaged. If meditation is not possible, do japa. Realization comes through japa. If a meditative mood comes, well and good, but by no means do it by force. Right? So, yes, for Shantanananda here, he apparently could meditate. And so meditation and japa weren't the same thing for him. He had managed to still the mind at least enough to get some meditation in there. And so she says, mother says, if you can't do meditation, if you can't hold that unbroken thought of God, then do japam, right? And if you can't do japam, don't be too troubled if your mind is going to other things like what you're doing, what needs to be done, whatnot. Don't worry too much like that. Do mind if it's going toward worldly things. Be very careful about that. You don't want that to happen. Shantanananda, is it better to do spiritual practice staying at the monastery in Varanasi than in a solitary place? Mother, if you undergo spiritual practices for some time in a solitary place like Rishikesh, you will find that your mind has become strong, and then you can live in any place or society without being affected by it in the least. Right? So what does that say? Well, first of all, in your practice at the beginning, we have to do a lot of unpopular things, right? We have to go to the temple a lot. We have to hang out with holy company. We have to not do things that put us into situations that cater to a weakness or cater to a vulnerability that we have. We have to cut some people out of our life. We have to not hang out with some people, right? And I always hate that because I know there was a time in my life where I was the person people shouldn't hang out with. So there's a certain sensitivity to that, because nobody wants to be that person. But there are times in spiritual life where it is appropriate. If there's, I know one of my good friends when I joined the monastery, he simply couldn't understand my being a monk. And every time he called, he would always invite me to do something. Hey, well, let's go out on Sunday. Why don't you come on? We haven't done anything in a long time. And he wouldn't stop. And so at some point, I had to do a very difficult thing and just break off, just say, no, I can't subject myself to that anymore. I have to take care of myself because I'm a beginner, right? I can be pulled out. I can be pulled into, I can be talked into a mistake. And so in the beginning, it's difficult. We have to do these things. We have to make very unpopular decisions, but understand that that's not the ideal of religion. Ramakrishna says when a tree is a sapling, yes, you have to put a fence around it. Otherwise, an elephant will trample it or the deer will eat it. But so when it's young, yes, you have to put a fence around it. You have to guard it. But once you've gotten some strength, some inner strength, once you've touched some truths within yourself, then you don't have to play those. You don't have to do those practices. I was going to say play those games, but they're in the beginning. They're not games. They're very important, and it shouldn't be taken lightly. But that we should, understand though that the ideal isn't, keeping people away and not associating with different people. That's not the ideal. We only practice that at the beginning because we're weak. And so we have to become strong inside. You have to become established in your practice. You have to carry your own atmosphere with you, which means you should be very aware that you have within you the temple where the divine presence is. And if you can't do that, then know that you need to put up some fences. You need to take some training wheels. You need to put some things into place that help you, that are helpful to you. And in time, you can remove them, but don't be in a hurry to remove them. If you'll fall off the bike and bloody your face, don't do it. So be careful and do what is necessary to protect your spiritual life at any cost until you've established the shrine within your heart, until you have that holy atmosphere within yourself, that you can follow the name straight to the shrine if you're confronted with things that are difficult for you. And you'll know when the time is there. And if you don't know, then the time isn't there. If you don't know that you can be strong enough, then you're not strong enough. So hold that. She's being very, very, very direct with us here. Shantanananda, I have been practicing asanas for some days to keep my health in good condition. These postures help one in digesting food and practicing continence. Mother, be careful about it, right? So he was asking about the asanas early, and these are the things that lead to spiritual powers. And so she's just telling him, be careful about it. If you continue such exercise for a long time, the mind may be diverted to the body. Again, if you give them up, it may affect your health. Therefore, you should exercise discretion. So this is very good teaching right here, because the order has an interesting relationship with practices, even Hatha Yoga. Ramakrishna isn't super enthusiastic about it, not because of the practice itself, but because he says that those practices will place your mind on the body. And you can see that that's true. You can see that that's true, but it's not an absolute truth. That's why she's giving some wiggle room here. She's saying, look, if you're doing it for your health and it's helpful to your health, go ahead, but be very careful and guard your mind. Be aware that it's going to put your mind more and more on your body, right? And so counter it. Do japa while you're doing your yoga. Do spiritual things. Keep your mind in a spiritual space, and focus on the inward self. When I was doing yoga for a while, I know that's hard to believe, but I was doing yoga for a little while at one point in the monastery, and that was one of the things that I did. Like the particular practice where I started it, it was my teacher was having me do this, right? Which is a silly exercise. You're not even holding a weight, right? So it seemed like, oh, that's easy. But we would do it, a few hundred times. And after you've done this 100 times, you're like, ugh. And I was sitting there really suffering from it. And I thought, let me do an experiment. I thought to myself, I said, instead of placing my awareness in my arms, and instead of focusing on that feeling of fatigue that's there, and instead of occupying myself with my arms, the moving part of my body, I'm going to have my arms indicate the part of me that's not moving. And I thought, I'm going to sit and put my attention in the shrine, in my heart, right? And from there, let the body do what it's doing, and just let the movement indicate that in me which is not moving. And I tell you, that made all the difference. I could sit there and do this literally all day with that way, putting the mind in the heart and just going forward. I tried it at another time, and that was very successful. I used to run these stairs, the Lion Street steps in San Francisco. It was 3 blocks of the sidewalk that were just stairs the whole way up. And I would run those up and down, and I would try and do them, 5 full rounds. So 5 round trips, let's put it that way. And that would get that would wear me out. And so I did the same thing there. I decided one day I would run those steps, not as if I was running them, because the body is my chariot, right? And I'm riding in the chariot. And so I tried, as I was running up and down those stairs, instead of thinking of myself as doing this exercise, I thought of myself as riding the body as the body ran up and down the stairs. And just that change in consciousness, that change in thought, had the same effect. The tiredness of my body was not nearly as overwhelming, nor not nearly the issue that it was when I was identifying with body and doing it, but seeing that I was riding the body up and down these stairs. And so there's great wisdom in these teachings. And if you explore them, use them, think of ways in your life that they're very helpful to you with, you will find a lot of power in these things. This truth can bring you to God. These practices will leave you at the feet of God if you practice them with sincerity and earnestness. These are not just rules. These are pointings to power, pointings of great strength that will undo your delusions. So be a little careful about it. If you continue such exercises for a long time, the mind may be diverted to the body. Again, if you give them up, it may affect your health. Therefore, exercise discretion. Just be aware and think. Go forward. Shantanananda, Mother, I only practice them for 5 or 10 minutes for good digestion. Mother, that's all right. I warned you because if you practice any exercise and give it up, it may ultimately impair your health. I bless you, my child, that you may have God consciousness. Right? So she is saying, it's okay. Just be as careful as I'm telling you to be. I'm blessing you in it. Go forward. Shantanananda, I'm practicing pranayama. Shall I continue it? Mother, yes, you may do a little, but don't go to excess and heat your brain and nervous system. If the mind becomes quiet of itself, then what is the need of pranayama? Okay, so there's the point of pranayama. Use it just enough to keep the mind calm. Don't use it to the degree that you might start bumping into some of these other things, right? Use it for keeping the mind calm. Shantanananda. Nothing is gained, mother, without the awakening of the Kundalini. Mother, quite so, my child, but the Kundalini will gradually be awakened. You will realize everything by the repetition of God's name, right? So that's what she's saying. She says, don't, that's all you need to do. You know, there's a wonderful poem by Hafiz where he's having a conversation with a young man who's on his way to go sit on a mountaintop to eat bark and snow in order to realize God, right? And Hafiz is intercepting him on the way up the mountain and saying, where are you going? He says, oh, I'm going to go up there to realize God. He says, do you not realize God is as close to you as the lining of your stomach? He's here with you now. And the young man's like, no, I must go and do my practice. I must go sit there. And he said, well, then by all means, go sit on the mountaintop, eat snow and bark. I bless you. Right. So it's like that. Even in this, she's saying that directly, you know, she's saying the Kundalini is going to be awakened. Just keep chanting the name of God. Keep doing your japam. That's all that's necessary. You will realize everything by the repetition of God's name. Before the awakening of the Kundalini, one hears the Anahata sound, the Om. But nothing can be achieved without the grace of the Divine Mother. Again, she's emphasizing to him, it's not your practice that is giving you these returns, right? It is the grace of God that gives these returns on here. Just sing the name of God, and it will come. Be patient. Don't make it a goal. Don't be goal-oriented in your practice. Remember, we're talking about that. This moment is all you have, right? Your realization exists within you already at this moment. You may not know that, you may not believe that, you may not even be able to see any hint of that, but enjoy it nonetheless. Sit in the presence and assume that the love of God is enough for you. Sit in the presence and assume that the grace is deep enough for you. Sit there and know that your realization is inevitable and that all of it exists within you right now, and it's just a matter of acceptance. Sit and know that. And when you doubt it, keep knowing it. Keep knowing it. Keep knowing it as you sing the name of God. All right, we'll stop there for tonight. You guys are so nice to me. You don't say anything at all.
I was just sending you a message, just saying I could stay here all night, but you might want to check your time.